Good morning, folks. My name is Jimmy Bashar with the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the California ISO Stakeholder Call to discuss the latest stakeholder briefing on the commitment costs and default energy bid enhancements initiative to discuss the revised draft tariff language as a follow-up from our previous web conference. Before we begin, I'd like to also take this time to highlight an upcoming enhancement that we will soon be providing our stakeholders for submitting comments, as hopefully most of you have heard by now. This is part of our overall continued web redesign efforts. Visitors will now be able to view all comments from a single click rather than having to open multiple PDFs. The tool will also provide the ability to filter comments by entity or by question and to submit comments directly into the tool, reducing the risk of transferring viruses to the ISO through attachments. We are still allowing attachments, though, for submitting tariff language comments that require redlining or for submitting formulas or diagrams. And then once launched, the commenting tool would require only a one-time registration password, after which users would be able to sign in with their email addresses moving forward. We did have a recent stakeholder call on this about a week or two ago, and we are currently working to incorporate stakeholder feedback. And assuming all that goes smoothly, we do plan to roll out soon thereafter, so please stay tuned for further announcements on this. And just as a reminder, folks, this call does represent the final call for this revised draft tariff language discussion, so we won't be taking formal comments, but of course we are happy to take any informal comments following the call. So with that, I'll move on. We have today as a presenter Brittany Dean from our Market Infrastructure Policy Group. The co-presenter to go over the draft tariff language will be Anna McKenna from our legal group. We also have Brad Cooper from our Market Infrastructure Policy Group. We have Greg Ford from our Power Systems Technology Development Group. And we have Guillermo Bautista from our Market Analysis and Forecasting Group. In addition, as you may know, all calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to the recordings after the meetings. The recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meetings. Of course, the recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without ISO's permission. And lastly, of course, if you have any questions, please raise your hand virtually by pressing #2. And of course, we request that you state the name and the company that you represent. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brittany.
Thank you, Jimmy. Hello, everyone. We will first begin our call reviewing the original policy that was submitted to FERC through our CCW initiative. The summary of that filing includes that we were not asking to make any changes to our default commitment costs or default energy bids, which we refer to as our reference levels, and how they were calculated. This means that within the default commitment costs, there was a 125 multiplier, and within the default energy bids, there was a 110 multiplier. In our summary filing to FERC, we requested no changes to that. We also were requesting FERC to approve that suppliers would be allowed to request adjustments to those reference levels. And when they made those reference level adjustments, the multipliers for the commitment cost, which is 125%, and the multiplier for energy bids for 110 would be included when they submitted those reference level requests. We also were proposing to allow a Monday-only gas index as well as updates to the real-time market reference levels that were based on our current gas prices. And then within that scope, we also asked for permanent measures that were temporary through the Aliso Canyon proposal to be made permanent through this filing. Next slide. In the beginning of this year, we received feedback from FERC that they rejected the 125 multiplier in default commitment costs when suppliers were submitting reference level adjustments. They did not rule on the remainder of the CCW policy. However, they did accept other proposals, which were the use of the Monday-only index, the real-time updates, and then to the gas indices that we use for those reference levels, and then to permanently implement those Aliso Canyon measures that were temporary. Next slide. So, if you recall, we have had 2 stakeholder meetings since January 20 of this year. The first was in February and the second was in March. Before today, we had proposed to go back to FERC and just propose to change that our commitment cost default energy bid multiplier that was 125 be reduced to 110. And that we would also allow that 110% multiplier when suppliers were making reference level adjustments to be included in that calculation. We, during their stakeholder comments, we had a couple of stakeholders in different camps. Suppliers were concerned about the 110% being changed because it would change the status quo and leave suppliers worse off than where they were today. They also made the point that the policy that the Board of Governors approved was going to going to change the commitment cost multipliers to 110% when, after a period, and also with the caveat that the commitment cost mitigation would be in place. On the other side, DMM was concerned about the 110% continuing to be left in the reference level adjustments because of the price differences that do not occur throughout the day for gas. So what everyone pretty much was advocating for was that the ISO leave the commitment cost at 125, and this is now our proposal. We are planning to resubmit to FERC that we do not propose any changes to how we currently calculate our default commitment costs and default energy bids, meaning we will retain the 125% multiplier in those commitment cost calculations and the 110% in the default energy bids. The difference now is when we allow suppliers to make reference level adjustments, we are not going to allow the multipliers used in the reference levels to be then calculated to update their reference levels. That will be for both commitment costs and default energy bids. So, well, there's a couple examples in a little bit explaining how that works. If we go to the next slide. So the reason we're keeping the 125 multiplier in the calculation of the default commitment cost bids is that it captures a variety of things. It captures the differences between the weighted average price that's used to calculate our bid caps, and as well as the changes in prices for individual transactions. This is especially true for our EIM areas where we have a ton of information and liquidity for gas markets in the California areas, but we don't have a lot of data in EIM. So the 125% makes up for those instances where those prices in the EIM areas would exceed the weighted average price. The 125% multiplier also captures those resource operational constraints that the market doesn't fully model, as well as incidental and hard to define costs that the formulaic calculations may not capture. Also, retaining the 125% multiplier reduces the quantity of the amount of reference level adjustments suppliers have to make, which then reduces the administrative burden on suppliers and the ISO. So because of these reasons, we believe retaining the 125% multiplier in the default commitment cost bid is appropriate. So if you move to the next slide, here's the example of how our default commitment costs are calculated today. So this is before any adjustments are made to their reference levels. Again, we are not proposing to make any changes to this calculation. So, for example, we're using the current default minimum load cost bid calculation, which, as you can see, has the 125%. It takes the gas price, the PMIN, heat rate, and then the non-fuel costs, and those are multiplied by 125%, plus if the supplier has an opportunity cost. That is the calculation. Nothing from today, no changes to our existing tariff rules are going to be made for this calculation. Next slide. And then for this portion, I will turn it over to Guillermo, who will explain the data in relation to why the 125% is still needed.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everybody. The slides that you have here for the data is basically the same set of slides that we have had in the last 2 cycles, and it's just a reference of what data we have used to size the difference of price that we have observed between the trades and the price that the market uses. This is a distribution of the price differences between the gas prices we use in our markets, either the day ahead or the real-time market, and the gas trading price that we have available from ICE. Next day stands for the day ahead prices compared to the next day prices, while the same day is standing for trades of the same day strip compared against the real-time prices in the ISO market. What we basically do is to take each trade, we measure the deviation between that trade price against the ISO price, and if the gas trading price, for instance, is greater than the weighted price that we use in the market, then the deviation will be counted as positive. Once we have estimated every single deviation from all the trades, we simply organize those in a relative percentage. 10% deviation means that the trading price is 10% higher than the ISO price we use in the market. This overall allows us to see how the distribution of these deviations are. This plot illustrates the sample for so-called city gate, and you can see that the majority of trades fall in a very narrow range of minus plus 5% deviations with respect to the ISO price. As we go further to the tails in the range of deviations, we can have less and less transactions to account for. For instance, the deviations that are greater than 10% of the ISO with respect to the ISO prices is quite small for the next day, but it's a bit more meaningful for the same day prices. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. This is exactly the same data, but it is organized just in a distribution curve. And when we are targeting this discussion about the variation of 20–25%, and we just draw a line on that distribution curve, you can see that for the next day prices, the one that we use in the day ahead, that deviation is quite small, basically it's negligible, but it becomes more meaningful once we are dealing with the same day prices in the range of a deviation of cumulative distribution of about 20+%. If we move to the next slide, please. We have basically the same information, but this is only for the PG&E city gate. And again, this is just to give you a reference of how the price variation, deviations with respect to the ISO prices play out when we actually look at the individual trades that we have available in ICE. With this, let's see if we have any questions before I hand it over to Brittany.
We do have a couple of questions on the line. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hey, this is Michelle Quito from the CPC. I have a couple of questions going back to Brittany's because you guys didn't stop for comments after that section. So could you just, I've got like 4 questions. So the first question is, why are you guys not taking comments on this proposal, given that this, to me, now looks like a pretty big change from what you had in March?
Hi, Michelle. This is Anna. I'll actually address that question quickly if I could. Actually, we don't really view this as a substantial change from what we previously filed because we have always had the 25% and 10% commitment cost adders in our DEDs. We did change our position since March based on input both from DMM and stakeholders, well, basically everybody. So we felt this was responsive to everybody's comments. We didn't view this as substantial change based on the comments we received. But if you have any concerns, we're definitely here to talk about it today, and we can always, talk about it offline as well. But our hope was that this responded to everybody's comments.
Yeah, well, I think we wrote supportive comments of the 110% multiplier, and I think we were prepared to support at FERC. And this, to me, is a change that we now have to go back and see if we have authorization. So to me, this is a change, and maybe you could help me. When do you guys plan to go to FERC with this?
First week of June is when we're hoping to file, but just as a commentary in terms of how the FERC process works, we are not proposing any changes to our current default energy bid calculations or our default commitment cost calculations. So there would be no change before the Commission to consider with regards to the actual calculation on these two items. The change in the tariff would be providing participants a mechanism for changing their reference levels. And in that process, consistent with the Commission's guidance, we're proposing not to have any adders at all added to those calculations. So if you think about it, there'll be no 205 filing on the day.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I totally get it. So you're saying if we want to challenge the 25%, if we think that's unjust and unreasonable, you're suggesting it would have to be a 206. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So then,
yeah, that's kind of how we're going to factor it.
Yeah. So Guillermo, could I ask you a question? What's the data that you have here? What time period are you looking at? The SoCal City Gate Hub. Hello?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, this was based on data from 2017, 18, and 19.
Okay, and do you know how much of the spike is due to 2018 when the penalty provisions were in place? So taking out that, given that we no longer have those similar penalty provisions, do you have any idea whether this would look similar or not? Like if you just looked at 2019, for example?
No, and I think one of the plans was to try to get a more robust sample accounting for more than 1 year. We haven't done any effect.
Yeah, but you understand that 2018 was different than 2019. You understand what was happening for the SoCal gas system, right?
Oh, yeah, but then we can start picking the year that is more favorable. I think we lose some.
Right,
merit.
But also there's been a structural change between 2018 and 2019 in the gas markets, right? Or do you not agree with that?
I don't think I'm agreeing or not with that. What I'm saying is that I need to have a robust enough sample of data to be able to do analytics. If I just pick and choose one single year, yes, we can isolate some effects, but overall we are looking at the trend of the gas market before and after.
Okay. I mean, just in the 831, Perry only looked at 2019, and we knew 2019. There we didn't go for a large sample. So I'm just saying, right? We just looked at, for the system market power, we only looked at 2019. So why didn't we look at 2017, 2018, and 2019?
Because it's cheaper to compute in gas prices versus doing a whole calculation of market power.
Okay, but if you want more, okay, I'm just saying in terms of picking and choosing. Okay, and then what would the PG&E slide look like if you calculated something similar to page 9 for the PG&E gate hub prices? Could you guys do that as well?
Sorry, I didn't catch your last question.
Sorry. So for SoCal Gas, you did page 8, you do a distribution, and page 9, you do the drawing to indicate where 20% is effective, right? So you have a blue line and a red line. I'm saying you didn't do the same for PG&E. What do you suspect it would look like?
I would have to generate it to tell you how it looks like, and I think that it's not that difficult. If there is any opportunity to provide that information and it's useful, we can put it together.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would guess that the blue line and the red line for the PG&E would be quite similar, right? Based on looking at the data. meaning that you would probably capture most of it, the 10% deviation?
No, I think it's going to be quite different. If you see, for instance, local Edison, the blue and the red one are different just because the distribution is different. So for PG&E, I think that difference is going to be even more pronounced.
Okay, well, maybe if you could show it, that would be great. Thank you. Those are my questions.
You're welcome.
All right, we're moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. I guess I had more of a comment towards the beginning of the presentation. I just wanted to thank you guys for taking the time and holding that other stakeholder call was a month ago to kind of walk through these changes, and then you guys really taking into consideration all the comments that were submitted. I get that you kind of had two different camps, but I think that this kind of the process you guys have laid out here is a very, very reasonable approach. And I just kind of as a side note, we think that kind of another reason why it's appropriate to not make any changes right now with the 125% multiplier is I think, Brittany, you had kind of commented on the overall picture of the policy that originally developed this proposal. And when you look at the overall policy, the whole intent was to increase the bidding flexibility for suppliers. And that did include mitigating down to 110%. But again, that was really tied to a scenario where without mitigation, suppliers were actually able to bid up to 300% of the commitment cost. So in our minds, that 110% mitigation was tied to also increasing the bidding flexibility. So we really appreciate you guys taking your time and really contemplating everyone's comments in the process. So I just wanted to kind of voice that for you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right, and there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, we could go past Guillermo's last slide. Perfect. Thank you. So now we're going to switch to the difference our proposal is making, and which Anna was alluding to, the differences in our tariffs that will occur once we make this filing and if it is approved by FERC. So for reference level change requests, so when a supplier needs to update their reference levels because their cost estimates have differed from what we have calculated, for both the default commitment cost bids and default energy bids, we believe that including either the 125% multiplier or the 110% multiplier is unnecessary. The reason we believe it is unnecessary and are going to exclude them from being included in reference level adjustments when suppliers send those to the ISO is because of the infrequency we see in price differences that occur throughout the day. Additionally, after the fact, cost recovery, which is part of our proposal, is available for any costs that are not recovered or covered through their reference level change request. Next slide. So now we're moving to the example of how our proposal has changed. Similarly to the example of how we use minimum load cost to describe how that calculation wasn't changing, we'll be using it here. There are, if you recall, two processes in which a supplier may make a change to their reference level adjustment. That is through our automated process or through our manual process. There is a caveat in how suppliers will be submitting information to the ISO, and I will go through that here. When suppliers are submitting an automated reference level adjustment request, they must calculate their commitment cost bid using their new expected or actual fuel cost. When they do that, the calculation should not include the 125% multiplier. So they will submit the total calculations as shown here. Obviously, there are some other pieces of this calculation. We just use this for simplicity, but for this instance, they would be submitting their specific resource gas price timesing that by payment, heat rate, non-fuel costs, and if they have an opportunity cost adder, that total bid would then be submitted through our automated process and would be delivered in through the systems that we have created to achieve them receiving a reference level change request. The difference now for suppliers that go through the manual request is they will not be submitting the total calculation or total bid that they would like the ISO to use. Instead, they will only be submitting their actual or expected fuel cost. Then the ISO will take that price and calculate their revised reference level bid. And again, in that manual request, obviously since they're just giving their actual fuel costs, when we recalculate their reference level, it would not include 125% multiplier. And this is same with energy. So if you're making a reference level adjustment to your default energy bid, the 110% would not be included in both the automated reference level change request process and the manual request process. And with that, I will turn it over to Guillermo to explain the data information we have, and then we will pause for questions.
Thank you, Brittany. Michelle, next slide, please. Okay, again, this is the same information we have provided in the previous rounds, and I want to highlight what they capture. In this specific case, what we have done is take one trading date at a time and basically see the trend of the individual trades over the trading period for the gas market. And there are two sets of dots, one in blue, that is the individual trades. The size of the bubble basically indicates the volume of the trade. And the bubble in green is the day-ahead price that we used. So if we start pointing towards the trend that we have from the time we have updated basically the day-ahead price towards the end of the trading horizon, you can see how the trades evolved. Effectively, we have picked the top dates. Those top dates are based on what the most dramatic or the steep changes of price have happened through the horizon of the trading. In this case, you can see that the price around 8:30 when we pick it up for the day-ahead consumption was in the range of 3.8 or so. And eventually, at the end of the trading cycle, this price increased up to basically $5 per MMBTU. Next slide, please. The same pattern can be plotted against the same-day trades and the real-time price. And this is not an exhaustive sample. We just picked the top 4 days where we saw the most rapid changes over the horizon of the trading. There may be many other days that may have less changes, or they may be actually flat. And we are just having here to highlight a sample of those days where the changes were quite steep during the horizon of the trading. And these are quite diverse days. You can see there are some from the winter in 2017, the first one in the upper left corner. We have others like the lower left corner that is in the middle of the summer. The idea here is to size that in some cases, may not be as frequently as we would expect, but it happens. There are cases, there are days in which the progression of the trading prices on the gas are quite steep, and this highlights that fact. You can see, for instance, in the upper left corner, the prices were in the range of $3.38, and they jumped to 3.5. While if you look at the lower corner on the left, you can see that we are talking about a range between $13 all the way up to plus $27. This happens not just in days with very extreme prices. It may also happen in days where the prices are in the lower range. And again, the whole point here is to illustrate how during the horizon of the trading, the transactions may show a progression of the prices in the upward direction. Brittany, I think that's all what we have in the deck, right?
Yes, so we can pause here for questions.
And we do have a couple of questions on the phone. Call, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hey, this is Michelle Keto from the CPC again. So I just want to note that this is my point about a paradigm shift. So the lower left-hand corner is obviously the penalty prices getting embedded in the gas prices, and that issue has been addressed. So I think cherry picking to show these things doesn't illustrate what happens the vast majority of time and whether this can even occur. This $12 to $32 could ever occur again. And this is penalty prices embedded in the gas prices. So I just want to note that. And then I note the lower right-hand corner that the price you're using currently is much higher than the gas prices. So I just want to make those 2 points. Thanks.
Yeah, Michelle, this is not about cherry picking. I was very crystal clear that I went after the stop days with the most dramatic changes. This is not cherry picking. It's simply going from the highest to the lowest. And whatever they are, whether they are before or after the changes that you indicated, that is a moot point, because here we are talking about the relative change with respect to the gas price of that specific day, not across days. So a 10% change happens regardless if it is in the range of $2 or $20.
Brad, this is Brad. I'd add along the lines of what Guillermo's saying. Our point here in showing these is, these were that changes like this are very infrequent, and these are the only days we can find with significant changes. So I think we're agreeing with you that the gas price doesn't change much throughout the day. That's why we're backing off our proposal to include the 10% in DEBs and commitment costs DEBs after reference level adjustments. I think it was the last call or after the last call, DMM presented some analysis and made that point that the gas prices don't change frequently throughout the day.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we're moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Just a couple quick questions here. With regard to the automated adjustments or the manual requests, what does the timing look like for those relative to the market run, or kind of how late can either of the two processes get going before it's too late for them to get included in the market run, and entities would have to sort of move to the after-the-fact cost recovery process?
So Greg Ford might be more able to answer this more specifically, but for the automated, it's whatever time period that you can get those changes in, and if it's allowable, depending on when the market is going for those processes, would that be interplayed in that? For the manual adjustments, I believe in the DRS there is a time limit in which the ISO is seeking a period for suppliers to come and have those adjustment levels reviewed. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I believe it's from 8 to 9 in the morning that the ISO would be entertaining those manual requests. And then once those are reviewed, it's as soon as they can get those new reference level adjustments into the market. Greg, if I've missed something, please go ahead and jump in.
Hi, Brittany. I think you got it right. And yeah, again, for the automated system, it'll be applicable to the next market that's still open.
This is Anna. I just wanted to point out with regards to the after the fact, you do have to make a request for the automated or manual adjustment to move to the after the fact. So it's important that, scheduling coordinators, if they anticipate changes, that they put those requests in, even if they're ultimately denied, or if you don't get them in on time for your market run, you have to put your requests in.
Thanks, Anna. That's good information too. And yeah, it's I'll take a look at the business requirement specs on it again too. It's just kind of helpful to understand, how the timing for it shapes up relative to the rest of the activity that the SCs have, kind of going on in that same horizon. The other quick question I had is just kind of referencing, where we started with all this. Is there still a phase 2 coming on this initiative then to tackle that market power mitigation, market-based bidding scope that we were working on previously to kind of get to that point that Callie was talking about?
Yes, that's slated to get implemented not until 2022, I believe.
Okay, so we'd be having a stakeholder process on that maybe in 2021 for 2022 implementation if it goes according to plan?
Excuse me. I don't know when we would start that process, but yes, we would definitely be going through the same process we are right now for this phase, discussing our proposal to take to FERC, reviewing tariff language. That would all be done before that gets implemented.
Great. Thank you, and thanks for all the extra explanation today. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, I think with that.
Yeah, Michelle, thanks, Brittany and Guillermo. Michelle, would you mind passing over the presenter rights to Anna to begin the latter half of the session?
Okay, hi everybody again. So I'm just going to run through the tariff language. And I know you've all looked at this tariff language many times, but what I'd like to do for today's call is quickly, not so quickly, whatever time you want to take, but just run through the changes to the proposed tariff language in light of our current proposal as it will be submitted to FERC. And so I'm scrolling. I think everybody could see my screen. I have the tariff language as posted on the screen for those of you that are not on the screen. Can you all see everything? Just somebody, maybe from our presenter team, is it working?
Yes, I can see your screen, Anna.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to run through, like I said, the changes, the sort of pivotal changes with regards to our proposal, because we have a lot of, red lines in this document. So just as an orientation, remember in section 30.4, we made a lot of clarifying changes and reorganization. And we introduced the concept of default commit. Well, the concept is in our tariff already, but we introduced a new defined term, default commitment cost bids. And in that section is where we recharacterize, if you wish, or reclassified those calculations based on the proxy cost methodology in section 30.441 and 30.442. What I did for purposes of this tariff and in this round is that because we keep using the terms, the 125% multipliers and the 110 multipliers, including the default energy bid, I define new terms. And the new terms are commitment cost multiplier, as well as default energy bid multiplier. You don't see that in this section, but those are two new terms. I defined those terms because we were using that 125 and the 110 throughout the tariff, and it was getting confusing. So now we just have to refer to that defined term. And it just cleaned up a little bit this section of the tariff. But the methodology for default commitment cost bids is exactly the same as today. That doesn't change. So all that's changing in this tariff section is that I've reclassified with some other sections and put it all in this section so it's easier to refer to. Same thing with all these red lines. These are all things that came from other parts of the tariff that we put in here so that it was neatly in one area. So now I'll pause for a moment if there are any questions as I scroll to the next section. Okay.
We do have one question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello, this is Kathleen Colbert from NRG. Anna, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Kathleen.
Oh, hi. Great. Okay, just confirming. Perfect. I had I guess let me just start and say, since I didn't jump in earlier, I wanted to express my thanks for the CAISO holding the stakeholder meeting back in March and giving the opportunity for stakeholders to submit comments and considering them. I think that I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to continue engaging with the CAISO through this process, as well as holding this tariff review. So I just want to say thank you very much for that. I had a clarifying question on 30.4.5, which is the section just after the one you were discussing, the 30.4.5.1 on natural gas-fired resources for the proxy startup cost.
I think it's just one.
Go up a little bit more. Yeah, perfect. I just had a question. I noticed when I was reading through the red line in the subsection B3 that it struck out, you had stricken the major maintenance adder in the proxy startup costs for the natural gas-fired resources. In the other sections, and kind of trying to read through that and see if there was some intent behind it, I noticed that the major maintenance adder was in the non-natural gas proxy startup costs, and so this it seemed a little maybe it seemed like it might not have been what was intended. So
we just moved it.
Oh, okay.
We just moved it from it was embedded in that language and it got really confusing because the calculation of the maintenance adder is separate. So we put it in subpart E, and then we define those costs for everybody down below. As I scroll down, it'll come up. 5.4. Because it's added to everybody. It's right there in 35.4. So we're saying we didn't have to embed it. It was creating confusion because we had it in two sections. So what we did is we cleaned it up from the internal formula itself, which just referenced that we added it, and we added subpart E. As you can see, we created the components, each component separately for these calculations, which made it clearer. We did that for all gas-fired and non-gas-fired, and the multipliers for the, the adders for major maintenance adders are now listed in subpart E of each subcomponent, which refers you to 30.454, where we then describe what those are. Because they're generically applied to every, component, we didn't have to keep repeating it. That's all we did.
All right, and that's helpful. Thank you. I would just have one note. It does look like it's in, it is described separately in the remainder of the proxy min load. So I'm just wanted to flag that for you.
Yeah, I think we had that as a cleanup.
Okay. Yeah, see if you see right there.
There's a cleanup we have to do in one of them.
If you look at C3.
Subsections.
Or sorry, C5.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, just wanted to flag that for you. My next question is in a different section, so thank you very much. I'll wait for that.
Okay. Is there anybody else that has any questions about this part?
There are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay. So I'll jump ahead to the next section, and I apologize for all the scrolling. For those of you who get motion sickness, you might just want to look away from your screen for a moment. That was a joke, guys. Sorry. Can't hear you all laughing, but I'm sure you all are. Okay, so the next section that we had, we made changes since our last discussion, is really going to be in section 30.11. But I did do some cleanup here, actually, before I get to 30.11. 30.7, we had to clean up a little bit because we clarified how the calculations are done for the minimum load costs and the startup costs when we, this information is submitted to us, and we had some language in here where we would have had to divide those components. We clarified that when we have an approved reference level change request, that the startup costs, the new reference levels, the revised reference levels will just be applied. And so we didn't have to have the old language. So I cleaned that up. That's what those red lines, highlighted red lines, are about in 30.7 on the input costs. And you'll see in the transition costs as well, we clarified the language there too, so that it's clear that we just take those costs once they've been revised. And I am contemplating further cleanups for the new terms on revised reference levels, because now we're distinguishing between the original and revised reference levels. I created a new term, revised reference level, or revised commitment costs and revised DEBs. I think we need to clean that up a little bit still. That was a thought we had after we posted the language, or just before we posted the language, rather. Brittany pointed that out. There's some create confusion. So because now you have a default energy bid and a default commitment cost bid that is based on, before the requests for changes are made, based on using the multipliers, and then afterwards, after you request for a change, we won't have multipliers in them. We decided to have two terms, one that refers to the pre-changes and one that refers to post-changes. And so that's what you'll see starting to happen in some of these sections with the term revised, default energy bids, and et cetera, as we go through. So in section 30.11, which is the bulk of this and really the meat of this proposed changes in this tariff section, a tariff amendment, and you'll see that a lot of changes that we submitted previously, of course, have fallen out because some of these were approved by the commission. So going to 30.11, which is going to be the major proposal before the commission, we made some changes to incorporate and clarify the processes that we're going through in terms of the automated and manual processes. In addition, we made changes to remove the use of the adders, and that's pretty much the substantive parts of it, but I'll walk through. So in this section, 30.11.11, we had this provision that in no event would the reasonable thresholds be lower than default commitment cost bids or the default energy bids. We removed that because later on you'll see we added the rule that when we make a manual change, it will update the reasonable thresholds to the revised reference levels. And this rule was intended to capture that process, and we just thought it'd be simpler to just state the rule and not have this general, rule here that might create confusion. And also because you're removing the default, the multipliers now from the reference levels, there might have been some confusion created with this statement. So that was a clarifying change. And then you'll see in 30.11.12, we foreshadow that when there's a manual request, the reference level then is updated to that whatever was accepted through the manual manual reference level change request, but also the reasonable threshold for that resource is updated as well. There were no changes in these calculations necessary because this is the reasonable threshold section. And in the reasonable threshold still contains the same formulas we use for the default commitment cost calculation. And in the reasonable threshold, there would be the multipliers included. But that's okay because this reasonable threshold, remember, is not used to calculate an entity's reference level. It's only used to compare and evaluate a reference level change request. So that doesn't change. The individual still has to come up with an expected or actual fuel cost that is within that range to justify a change. So there were no changes to the reasonable threshold section in that regard with the removal of the commitment cost adders. As I scroll down, I will take a moment, see if there's any questions.
We do have a question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, yes, this is Kathleen from NRD again. I have a couple questions for you on this section, but starting with the calculation for the natural gas-fired resources, 30.11.1.2.1 that you are on right now, Anna. We have a comment on something that may need clarified, at least from our perspective, so I wanted to see what your thoughts were. I've been rereading the section over a couple times, trying to see if I'm missing something. So, but what I see in here is that for the description of the multipliers that the natural gas commodity price is being applied to, I see two scenarios described. The first scenario being on days without a published daily gas price index. Second scenario being when the CAISO updates the natural gas commodity price. But there's a third scenario of days with a published gas price index where I understood the multiplier would be 110%. In our view, we thought it would be clearer if that third scenario was added in some way in this section so that it included a 110% for days with a published index, 110% days without, unless the CAISO is updated, et cetera.
I'm sorry, so it says right here, unless the ISO has an updated natural gas commodity price, then we'll use 110. Is that what you're referring to?
When I read this language and reflecting back on the first filing that was approved, I understood there to be an update to the natural gas price procedure that the CAISO could implement in real time.
Yeah, that comes later. That comes later, and that's an entirely different process. This is so these multipliers are distinct from the commitment cost multipliers and default energy bid multipliers that are embedded in the calculations up front. These scalars apply only to the fuel cost. And in this section, we're only providing you the formula of how we create the reasonable threshold. In another section, we describe how we might make updates to the fuel price itself, regardless of these scalars.
This is Brad, and I think what Kathleen is saying is we address days without a published daily gas price index where the multiplier is 125%. We address when we update the gas price in real time, where we say it's 110%, but we don't. It looks like we're missing the situation for days with a published gas price index, and we do not update the gas price, which we intended to be 110%. So I think we could take a double. I think we could take a double look at this, and yeah, it looks like we might be missing
I see what you're
situation.
saying. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it used to say, except for other days, and blah, 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 and I don't know what happened here. All right, I'm going to take a note on that. I think I see that, yes. But the updating part, there's another 110% that we use for purposes of, like, determining whether we're going to make an update, and that 110% is in another section. That's what I was trying to foreshadow. I thought that's what you guys were referring to.
So I do have some good equity in it.
Thank you.
All right, there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Okay, just a moment, please. I have to save this and just bear with me, guys. Sorry, I need to just save it really quick. Okay. All right. So moving forward, we're going to make that fix. We'll look at that again. I think that that will only be in that section. We won't have to make it in the other section for non-gas. And 30.1122, that change is just, I moved things around, really. And because we're now in the, we're not including the multipliers, and also there's some slight differences between what participants submit with regards to automated changes versus manual requests. I moved this requirement because it's only, this requirement with regards to having to calculate your request consistent with the methodology used for proxy cost reference levels and default energy bids. Those requirements only applied in the purposes for the purposes of the automated requests, and so I moved that to the automated request sections, which is down here. It's not really deleting it; it's just moving it. And then, with regards to the automated reference level change requests, we added that the language to ensure that these requests are not used to inflate your costs, and they should be without applying the multipliers. So we added that language to make it clear. And then again, it has to be supported by, documentation. That's existing language. We didn't change that. I just moved some of the wording around there. And this requirements section, I just added that section because, like I said, I moved things around between the manual and automated, which required me to change some section references and section numbers. Any comments on that or concerns?
We do have a question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Kathleen again from NRG. Quick clarifying question on section 30.11.3.2. I noticed that when listing out the default startup bid, default min load, and default energy bid, that the min load and the energy bid had that modifier without applying the multiplier, where the startup bid didn't. And I wondered if there was some rationale for that that we should understand.
No, I think what happened is I had those together the first time, then I split them, and so I'm just going to mention it twice. Yeah. Then I added in the drafting part. Yeah. So I just
that makes sense.
Okay. It's in both,
thank you.
right? So it might make more sense to say to calculate the proxy cost-based default commitment cost, because the same thing with the might make it clearer.
All right, there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay. It might be easier for us to just say that. I'll look at that again. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Should I move on? Okay, let's move on.
One additional question did pop in.
Okay.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Thank you. This is Kathleen again from NRG. I just wanted to make sure I was waiting for the right time in case you wanted to cover anything else. I had a question about the audit process in 30.11.3.5, I believe that is. We took that back and kind of talked through the 5-day response.
Can we hold on to that?
Oh, sure.
Kathleen?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Sorry, can we just
let me know
that because I want to do 30.11.4 first, and then we'll get, I just want to go in sequence just so I don't lose anything, if you don't mind. We're going to get to the audit section in a moment. Does that make sense? Can you hang on, or do you want to ask your question now?
Oh, no, I certainly can. I just think I thought it was in the prior section, in section 30.11.3.
Which section are you thinking of?
30.11.3.5.
I thought you, oh, 0.3.5. I heard 0.11.5, and I was thinking let's wait for that. But yes, 33.5 right here, yes.
The 5 business day requirement for scheduling coordinators to respond with the requested information. We were looking at that, and I mean, just being very honest, it seems kind of short to us for a turnaround time. One example being kind of concerned if the point person who may be running our trading desk is on vacation for a week. Are we going to be able to make that deadline? Is that set in stone, or is that something that we could talk about potentially giving a little bit more flexibility on?
You know, we try to balance things off, and we understand that, you know, there's always challenges, but you got to keep in mind that this is documentation you should have on hand, not something you have to go get. So it's important that we expedite these audit requests, because if it takes too long for us to audit and then implement the consequences of a failure of an audit, then our automated procedure is undermined. So what we try to do is balance things both ends, where, you know, we have to then review the data, of course. And we haven't changed this at all since when we first filed it, and it was something that we vetted thoroughly in our, you know, many meetings previously in terms of the process. And the reason why it is 5 business days is because if we take too long to get the data from the participant, it will delay the time in which we can actually complete the audit. And then if there was a failure of the audit, the participant would have the ability to continue to negatively impact the market. So in order to justify FERC, the a priori process that doesn't require verification before submission into the market, we wanted to make sure it was well balanced, and those were the timelines we worked through many months ago.
Okay, thank you for that.
I'm not quite sure we want to change our procedures right now.
No, I can take that back and think about that more. Thank you.
All right, there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, so I'll move to the manual reference level changes. The material changes we made here is that we clarified that the manual requests are really the submission of the actual or expected fuel costs themselves. That's what you're submitting when you're requesting that. You should be expecting those fuel costs to be, you know, greater than 10% or 50 cents per MMBTU as applicable, because, you know, for the non-fuel costs. And I put that, you know, that language, I took that from 3011.42 and put it up here in the applicability section because I thought it was better placed over there. And then what we did is we added the language here that the scheduling employers must submit the reference levels request, the manual reference level change request based on their actual or expected fuel costs. That's what you're actually submitting to us. And then once you submit that information, we will review it. If we approve it, then we will recalculate the reference levels with that new fuel cost without applying the commitment cost multiplier or default energy multiplier, as we've discussing. And that here in the evaluation part, I highlighted because I did some cleanup. This section was mostly here already, but there was some cleanup we did and some clarifications in light of the fact that we're looking at the expected fuel costs. So that's what changes you'll see in this section. And then once the manual request is approved, this language pre-existed, but again, I had to update the terminology. I'm introducing now the revised default commitment cost language and the revised DEB language, which are 2 new defined terms to describe that these are things that are produced out of these reference level change requests. And this application of the new revised reference levels applies both to manual and automated requests. I'll pause before I move to the next block changes. Any questions?
There are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay. Moving on to the next sets of changes. We didn't make any changes here in these sections, like they were previously filed, really. So that takes care of the bulk of the changes. I'm going to move to the defined terms. Actually, there was a little language here caught my eyes. I think this was a cross-reference and some clarification language that we fixed in section 39. Hang on, let's get the highlighted stuff. Yeah, this is where I started, because we're using these terms, 10%, sometimes we use 110, sometimes use 10. Anyway, I just redefined the terms to now have the term default energy bid multiplier, so that's what we'll use throughout the tariff as necessary. So that's why that change kicks in now. Just clarifying language. And there you go, the commitment cost multiplier is a new defined term at 125. Default energy bid multiplier at 110. That's a newly defined term. Oh, that was just a typo there. And revised default commitment cost bids, as I said, those are newly defined terms. They're helpful in our discussions of these concepts. And I think that's it. Are there any other questions, concerns, comments, edits, anything that you guys would like to share?
There is a question on the line. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Kathleen Colbert from NRG. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I just had one last question for you on section 30.7.9, the validation of startup bids and shutdown costs.
I think it's this section, yep.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, we just had a suggestion that to add the additional resource types that would be eligible to submit the startup costs to that text, similarly to how you handled it in 30.7.10. From our perspective, 30.7.10, which included adding the participating load, reliability demand response resource, or the proxy demand resource to that text after the forward generating resource like you have there. It was just clear to us, and we wanted to make that suggestion for your consideration.
Okay, I'll make a note. Although I think some research don't have startup costs, but we'll look into that. That may be why you didn't see it in other parts, but we'll look into that. Like, participating loads don't have startup costs.
That would be great, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe that's why you didn't see it up there, because they don't have them, right? Minimum load, though, everybody has it.
All right, there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, so with that, we will proceed. We're not we're not taking any further comments. Thank you for all the comments today. If you guys have any additional concerns, I would suggest you pick up the phone at this point and call us and we'll figure out a way to get your comments. But we would like to file this in the first week of June. That's our goal, and hopefully this will be the last round on this filing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Brittany and Guillermo, of course. And thanks, everybody, of course, for joining, especially during the middle of current events. We appreciate your participation. As mentioned, you can look for the recording for this to be available within the next couple of business days. And we look forward to filing this. Hopefully, we've addressed all the comments. And as Anna mentioned, we are accepting informal comments up until the filing date. I'll defer to Anna for the timing of that, of course. But please reach out to me if you have any questions at initiativecomments@kaiso.com. And once again, thanks so much, folks, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.